I am 76 years old and live in the suburbs of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. If you have seen some of the old videos, you will remember me, the man who makes hot coffee every morning, opens the newspaper, and sits on the porch watching the morning sun. But that morning, something was different. Not because the newspaper reported colder than usual weather, nor because the Cardinals were gathering on my white picket fence, but because of a small headline, neatly tucked away on page 3, right below the editorial. I am a 76-year-old man living in the suburbs of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. If you have seen some of my old videos, you may remember me. The guy who makes a cup of hot coffee every morning, opens the newspaper, and sits on his porch watching the sun rise. But that morning, something was strange. Not because the newspaper reported colder than usual weather, not because the Cardinals had gathered in unusual numbers on our white picket fence, but because the front page, in bold, scary type, read, "Pope Francis dies suddenly. Cause, stroke." I put the paper down. My hands shook as if someone had whispered a premonition. It took me several minutes to take another sip of coffee, and it was tasteless. Just yesterday, Easter, I saw him on television, sitting there, on a white chair in the middle of the Vatican Square, his hands shaking slightly but his mouth still smiling at the crowd, still slowly waving to thousands of parishioners. 87 years old, overcoming many events, being cared for by the most elite team of doctors, eating scientifically, with a schedule that left no room for arbitrariness. And yet, just after one night, he passed away from a stroke. What sent a chill down my spine was Pope Francis had no history of strokes before. He walked slowly, had knee problems, but never showed any obvious signs of a stroke. And yet, I thought about myself, an old Irish-American man living alone since my wife, Helen, died. I still drove to Kroger every week, still mowed my front lawn, still checked the post office every afternoon. I thought I was fine. But the news was like a slap in the face, enough to make me see clearly what I had been avoiding for years. I was at an age where one small mistake could cost me everything. There is one thing I have learned after 76 years of living on this earth. Nothing kills an old person faster than complacency. We think we are used to fatigue, to mild headaches, to the feeling of numbness in the hands for a moment, but that is also the reason why we miss the most dangerous sign, a stroke. Today's story isn't meant to scare you. It's meant to be a wake-up call, gently, slowly, as I'm telling you now. Because I know that if I miss the signs, you're probably doing the same thing. And if you are 65, 70, 75, and can still wake up in the morning, make a cup of hot tea, walk around the block, then congratulations. You are a rare gem. But that gem needs to be preserved. In this video, I tell you the story of Gloria, a retired nurse in Texas who thought she was just a little tired and almost died from a stroke. Then there's James, a friend of mine in Florida who had a second stroke and had no chance of recovery. I also talk about the habits that older Americans have that are unwittingly increasing their risk of stroke, from fast food to erratic sleep patterns to the "it's okay, I'll go see a doctor tomorrow" mentality. Please read on to the end, because maybe just a little bit of it will help you or someone you love live another year, 10 years, or more. If you find this video touching something in your heart, please hit the like button to show your support, and please subscribe so you don't miss out on future stories. It could save your life or someone you love. And if you've ever witnessed a loved one having a stroke or experienced something similar yourself, please share your story in the comments below. Someone might need to hear your story to avoid taking the wrong path. Gloria was a classmate of my late wife Helen. She lived in Austin, Texas, in a white bungalow with old pine trees and an old-fashioned swing. She was 74 years old, still going strong, still gardening, occasionally driving to the library, or going to church on Sundays. It was a quiet Sunday morning in early April. Gloria was making breakfast, whole wheat toast and soft-boiled eggs as usual. But as she reached for the kettle, something felt wrong. Her right hand seemed to disobey her. It trembled slightly. Then she dropped the kettle on the floor. Hot water splashed everywhere. She stood there for a few seconds, then tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her mouth was paralyzed. Her face was tilted to one side. Fortunately, Gloria had been a nurse, and despite her foggy mind, she was alert enough to realize what was happening. She managed to drag herself into the hallway and press the panic button on the wall, the kind meant for elderly people who lived alone. 9 minutes later, an ambulance arrived. Gloria was taken to St. David's Hospital in the city. The doctor diagnosed her with a TIA, transient ischemic attack, also known as a mini-stroke. Blood flow to the brain was blocked for a few minutes. If it had been 15 minutes later, she would have been paralyzed on one side. That was the doctor's word, not mine. After that day, Gloria changed completely. She no longer ignored the small signs. She no longer let the days go by with the promise that, "I'm fine." And perhaps after this story, you should also ask yourself, have I really paid attention to my body? I remember an old friend of mine, Richard Thomas, who lives in Charleston, South Carolina. In a previous video, I featured him, a 78-year-old widower who still wakes up at 6 a.m. every day, makes coffee, and reads the paper on his porch. He is the epitome of healthy aging, independent, active, and seemingly secure. But that is just the surface. Richard was a civil engineer, very good at calculations, but never went for regular health checkups. He told me, "If I don't see anything unusual, why should I check?" And that was his biggest mistake. One afternoon early last year, while watering flowers in the backyard, he suddenly felt his left leg go numb, then collapsed. He struggled to stand, only to fall a second time. By the time a neighbor found him, Richard had been lying motionless for nearly 30 minutes, unable to speak. It was a real stroke, not a mild one like Gloria's, but an ischemic stroke, a severe blockage of blood vessels in the brain. He survived, but the consequences were not small. The left side of his body was weak, his voice was distorted, and his short-term memory was significantly reduced. He could no longer live alone. He had to move in with his daughter in Atlanta. Every time I called, he tried to make jokes, but I could hear the disappointment in his laughter. Richard's story reminds me of an important point. Being healthy doesn't mean being safe. There are hidden risks, like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, or simply a habit of not going to the doctor. I'll share with you a list of the groups of people most at risk for stroke, based on both research and real-life stories. And I'll tell you about an Oregon teacher who thought she was just falling asleep, but was actually facing a silent stroke. Do you remember the last time you measured your blood pressure? I remember an old friend of mine, Richard Thomas, who lives in Charleston, South Carolina. In a previous video, I featured him, a 78-year-old widower who still wakes up at 6 a.m. every day, makes coffee, and reads the paper on his porch. He is the epitome of healthy aging, independent, active, and seemingly secure. But that is just the surface. Richard was a civil engineer, very good at calculations, but never went for regular health checkups. He told me, "If I don't see anything unusual, why should I check?" And that was his biggest mistake. One afternoon early last year, while watering flowers in the backyard, he suddenly felt his left leg go numb, then collapsed. He struggled to stand, only to fall a second time. By the time a neighbor found him, Richard had been lying motionless for nearly 30 minutes, unable to speak. It was a real stroke, not a mild one like Gloria's, but an ischemic stroke, a severe blockage of blood vessels in the brain. He survived, but the consequences were not small. The left side of his body was weak, his voice was distorted, and his short-term memory was significantly reduced. He could no longer live alone. He had to move in with his daughter in Atlanta. Every time I called, he tried to make jokes, but I could hear the disappointment in his laughter. Richard's story reminds me of an important point. Being healthy doesn't mean being safe. There are hidden risks, like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, or simply a habit of not going to the doctor. Now, let me share with you something that is hard to say, but very important if you are over 60. Who is most at risk of having a stroke? The answer is not in a medical lecture. It is in the way we live, in the stories we have shared. The first are those with a history of high blood pressure. High blood pressure silently damages the blood vessels in your brain every day, until one of them can't take it anymore. That's when it bursts or gets blocked. Second, people with diabetes. I once talked to an elderly man in Minnesota, Harold, who thought diabetes only affected blood sugar levels, but had no idea how much it damaged blood vessel walls. Third, people with high bad cholesterol or plaque in the artery walls. You may not have had a heart attack, but if your brain is not getting enough blood because of narrowed arteries, a stroke is only a matter of time. Fourth, the sedentary. In Florida, I met an 82-year-old woman who had spent the past 6 years at home, just sitting in front of the TV and the sofa. She said, "I don't go anywhere, so I don't need to move much." And then one day, her legs really couldn't take her anywhere anymore because of a severe stroke. Fifth, people with a history of smoking or drinking alcohol for a long time. I don't need to say much. That lifestyle is a close friend of stroke. Friday. Postmenopausal women, especially if they have underlying cardiovascular disease. They are often subjective because their symptoms are not as typical as in men. The story of Judith, a retired teacher living in Eugene, Oregon, is an example. Judith is 76 years old, has never smoked, has no diabetes, and no high blood pressure. One day she felt unusually sleepy, lethargic, and yawned. She thought it was her allergy medicine. But when her daughter called and she answered incoherently, as if she were sleepwalking, she immediately called 911. Judith had a silent stroke, one that had no obvious symptoms, such as paralysis or slurred speech, but an MRI showed two small lesions in her brain. When she woke up in the recovery room, Judith could only say one sentence. "I thought it was just drowsiness." You see, a stroke doesn't always come with a clap of thunder or a big fall. Sometimes it comes with a sigh, softly. And then it takes everything away. How to recognize the signs of a stroke, even if it's just a flash. And what saved Gloria's life in those fateful 9 minutes. Remember Gloria? My wife Helen's old friend from Austin, Texas. I mentioned her earlier in this story. But you probably don't know what really happened that fateful Sunday morning and why I believe her survival was due to the right response, at the right time, in the right place, by the right person. That morning, Gloria was making tea and preparing breakfast as usual. As she bent down to get a slice of bread from the lower drawer, she felt a sudden lightheadedness, not a spinning sensation, but a wave of heat rising up, blurring her vision. Her right hand began to shake, and a few seconds later, the glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. What happened next really scared her. She tried to bend down to pick up the glass, but her hands were no longer in control. Her mouth moved slowly. Her teeth and tongue were tangled together. When she tried to say her daughter's name, Nancy, only a strange, slurred, distorted sound came out. In that moment, Gloria knew this was not simple fatigue. This was a stroke. Thanks to her experience as a nurse, she did not wait. Even though one side of her body was starting to weaken, she still tried to drag herself a few steps to the hallway, where there was an emergency button specially designed for people living independently like her. That button, although small, was the bridge between life and death within 10 minutes. The ambulance arrived just in time. Medical staff performed the fast test at the scene. F. Face. One side of her face was visibly drooping. A. Arms. Can't lift right arm. S. Speech. Speech is slurred or distorted. T. Time. They took her away immediately, without a second's delay. Gloria arrived at the emergency room less than 25 minutes after her first symptoms appeared, and thanks to the timely injection of clot-busting drugs, she has made a near-complete recovery. The doctor called it a near-death experience, but I see it differently. I call it proof that if you recognize it early and act on it, a stroke may not be the end of the world. You see, time is brain. In a minute, millions of brain cells can die. An early call, a push of a button, or even just a call to a neighbor can save a life. So, the next part I want to tell you about is about the fleeting signs. Many people miss them because they think it's just tiredness. But that is the first bell, and whoever hears that bell will be the one who survives his own story. We've all had those mornings when we feel a little heavy, lightheaded, and our hands feel clumsier than usual. You might think it's because you didn't get enough sleep, or that you ate too much salt last night. But let me tell you a few things that, if I hadn't witnessed them myself, I would never have believed were the beginning signs of a stroke. A close friend of mine, Earl, 81, who lives in northern Ohio, makes a cup of black coffee every morning and does the newspaper crossword puzzle. One day he called me, his voice hoarse. "I'm feeling under the weather," he said. "I think I have a cold." But when I asked him a simple question, "What day is it, Earl?" he paused and said, March?" I knew something was wrong. I called his daughter right away, and less than 30 minutes later, he was in the hospital. Diagnosis: a transient ischemic attack. Another case, Clara, 74, from Arizona, was cycling in the park. Suddenly, she felt weakness in her left leg, but only for a few minutes, and then it returned to normal. She paid no attention. 2 weeks later, she had a real stroke, this time paralyzing half of her body. A transient ischemic attack, TIA, is like a warning, a flash of lightning before a storm. It comes for a few minutes, then it's gone. But if you ignore it, you miss your only chance to change your destiny. Here are a few small but extremely suspicious signs. Mispronounce words, or suddenly can't find the right words to say. One side of the face feels slightly numb, or the face feels distorted when looking in the mirror. A slight feeling of loss of balance, even for a moment. Blurred or dark vision in one eye. Yawning a lot. Unusual sleepiness for no apparent reason. You may think it's just old age, but your body is knocking on your door, asking you to listen. And if you're someone who says, "Maybe tomorrow is fine," please change that to, "I'll go see a doctor this afternoon." I'll share how to proactively prevent strokes, not just with medications, but with small changes in your daily lifestyle. And I'll tell you how an elderly man in Florida reversed his stroke risk with just the habit of drinking water and walking every morning. We've all had those mornings when we feel a little heavy, lightheaded, and our hands feel clumsier than usual. You might think it's because you didn't get enough sleep, or that you ate too much salt last night. But let me tell you a few things that, if I hadn't witnessed them myself, I would never have believed were the beginning signs of a stroke. A close friend of mine, Earl, 81, who lives in northern Ohio, makes a cup of black coffee every morning and does the newspaper crossword puzzle. One day he called me, his voice hoarse. "I'm feeling under the weather," he said. "I think I have a cold." But when I asked him a simple question, "What day is it, Earl?" he paused and said, March?" I knew something was wrong. I called his daughter right away, and less than 30 minutes later, he was in the hospital. Diagnosis: a transient ischemic attack. Another case, Clara, 74, from Arizona, was cycling in the park. Suddenly, she felt weakness in her left leg, but only for a few minutes, and then it returned to normal. She paid no attention. 2 weeks later, she had a real stroke, this time paralyzing half of her body. A transient ischemic attack, TIA, is like a warning, a flash of lightning before a storm. It comes for a few minutes, then it's gone. But if you ignore it, you miss your only chance to change your destiny. Here are a few small but extremely suspicious signs. Mispronounce words, or suddenly can't find the right words to say. One side of the face feels slightly numb, or the face feels distorted when looking in the mirror. A slight feeling of loss of balance, even for a moment. Blurred or dark vision in one eye. Yawning a lot. Unusual sleepiness for no apparent reason. You may think it's just old age, but your body is knocking on your door, asking you to listen. And if you're someone who says, maybe tomorrow is fine, please change that to, I'll go see a doctor this afternoon. I want to tell you a special story about Carlton Hayes, 77, of Sarasota, Florida. A single man, widowed for 12 years, he was diagnosed with pre-stroke and warned of a high risk within a year if he did not change his lifestyle. The doctor prescribed medication and advised a diet, but Carlton, with his stubborn Southern streak, just nodded and said no. But one thing I respect about him is that he didn't give up. He chose his own way. And that way is actually surprisingly simple. Every morning at 6:15, Carlton brews a pot of warm water, squeezes half a lemon into it, and adds a slice of ginger. He drinks it slowly as he stands on the porch, breathing in the moist, salty ocean air. Then he takes a leisurely walk along the sand for more than 30 minutes. Not for a strenuous workout, but just to listen to the waves and keep his mind from being paralyzed by the silence. He gave up his habit of eating fried bacon and syrup pancakes in the morning. Instead, he had boiled eggs, half an avocado, and a slice of whole wheat bread. He weighed himself once a week, kept a blood pressure diary, and monitored his blood sugar levels, even though he was not diabetic. A year later, at a follow-up visit, the doctor looked at the test results and shook his head. "Carlton, you not only avoided a stroke, you are getting younger." "The only thing I could do was start over," Carlton told me over the phone, his voice shaking. It was simple: water, walking, and perseverance. I believe if an old man in Florida can do it, then you, and anyone watching this video can do it too. James was a friend of mine from my youth, a black man from Georgia, a Vietnam veteran living in Gainesville, Florida. He was a strong man, not just physically, but in the way he laughed, the way he shook hands when he met friends. James had his first stroke when he was 73, a mild one. He survived. After that, the doctors told him to change his lifestyle, take his medication regularly, and come back every 3 months. But sometimes an ex-soldier can be the most stubborn. James believed he was fine. Then he drank Coke every night and ate salty BBQ every Sunday. And he told me, I'm fine. I can handle anything. The second time, things are no longer passable. It was an early October evening, and James was in the bathroom when he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. He fell to his knees, trying to hold on to the sink, but he couldn't move. No one heard him. He lay there for nearly 4 hours before his nephew came by, sensing something was wrong. James was rushed to the emergency room. This time, the brain damage was more severe. His left side was almost completely paralyzed. He could no longer stand up on his own. He needed a nurse to help him go to the bathroom. He no longer played dominoes with his friends on the porch like before. He no longer sang jazz every Sunday night with his old acoustic guitar. When I visited, James sat in his wheelchair, facing the window. His eyes were quiet, neither sad nor happy, just quiet. When I put my hand on his shoulder, he turned, smiled slightly, and whispered, "This time is not like last time." That sentence haunted me forever. A stroke isn't always a one-time thing. It can come back, and each time it comes back, it takes away a part of your life you weren't ready to let go of. And if you feel fine today, Don't let that fineness make you complacent, because, as James said, this time is not like last time. And last but not least, how to build a strong barrier to protect yourself from stroke, not just with medicine or diet, but by creating a community, because no one should face a stroke alone. I used to think that disease prevention was a personal matter. Eating, exercising, taking medication, that was each person's business. But I was wrong. What helps us avoid the first second stroke sometimes is not in our hand, but in the hands of those around us. A neighbor calls 911 after a sudden fall. An old friend texts every morning to check in. A small group walks together every afternoon. A grandchild sets a reminder on his phone to make sure he takes his medicine on time. I call it the community fence, something no one can build alone. I remember Walter, an old friend from Kansas. Every morning he made coffee and brought it to his neighbor, Mary. They didn't just drink coffee, they told each other stories about their children and grandchildren, reminded each other to check their blood pressure, and recorded the amount of salt they had eaten in their dinner the night before. One day, Mary felt numbness in her left leg but thought it was because she was sleeping in the wrong position. Walter had her measure her blood pressure and immediately took her to the doctor. The result? Pre-stroke warning. If it hadn't been for Walter, Mary might not have survived the night. The community fence doesn't have to be big. It just has to be intimate enough to keep us from being forgotten. And by living in such a community, we not only prevent strokes, we also live longer, live warmer. Do you have an elderly friend who lives alone? Call them today. Do you have a relative over 70 who is tired but has not gone to the doctor? Visit them today. Sometimes a word of greeting can save a heart. A gentle touch on the shoulder can wake up a person who is lost in subjectivity. I'll share with you something Pope Francis's doctor once said, something that brought a lump to my throat, about time and what we have left if we lose it. I read this in an interview with the Pope's personal physician, a small, gray-haired Italian man who spoke more with his eyes than with his words. When asked what worried him most about the Pope after his transient stroke, he did not answer immediately. He looked down at his hands and said, "It's not that we fear a bigger stroke, it's that we fear there won't be enough time for you to finish what you want to say." Hearing that, I suddenly became silent, because that is not only true for the Pope, it is true for all of us, those who have passed the age of 60, 70. Have you ever thought, maybe today is the last time you make yourself a cup of coffee, the last time you sit on the porch and watch the sun rise, or the last time you say, "I love you" to someone? We always think we have time, but time doesn't ask our opinion when it decides to stop. So, if you wake up tomorrow morning, see the sunlight through the curtains, hear the wind blowing through the trees in front of your house, you are luckier than millions of people in the world. Get up, walk even just a few steps, drink a glass of warm water, make a phone call, smile. Because those little things are how you beat a stroke every day. And if you've made it this far, I know you care about your health and the health of those around you. So please, click like if you find this story touches something deep inside you. Click subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss out on valuable stories and reminders in the next videos. And comment to share your story or tag someone you think needs to hear this. You may not expect it, but your small share will save a life. Or at least help someone avoid the scene James went through or the fear I saw in Gloria's eyes. See you in the next video. Then we will sit down again like two old friends to listen to our bodies and to each other a little more.